Your father passed away.
Okay, on the 10th. My dad died 13 days ago.
13 days ago.
Yeah, on June
yes.
10th.
But you will die, or you are scheduled for executions in
Right.
only 8 days.
Yes, sir.
How are you doing?
Imagine watching your father die. 13 days later, you're strapped to a table while your mother watches the state kill you too. 2 weeks, 2 funerals, one family destroyed by grief that no human should ever have to carry. That was Michael James Perry's last reality before Texas executed him on July 1st, 2010. He was 28 years old. His crime? Murdering 3 people for a car. But here's where your brain should start screaming questions. Michael swore until his final breath that police choked him, pistol whipped him, and beat a confession out of him that sent him to death row. His co-defendant, Jason Burkett, got life in prison. Michael got the needle. Same crime, same evidence, same trial. So why did one man walk away breathing and the other die? 3 innocent people were slaughtered on October 24th, 2001. Sandra Stotler, a 50-year-old nurse, was shot twice in her own garage and dumped in a lake like trash. Her teenage grandson, Adam, 17, and his best friend, Jeremy Richardson, 18, were executed in the woods, shot multiple times at close range because they happened to own a red Camaro 2 drug addicts wanted to steal. The violence was sickening. Sandra tried to stand after the first shotgun blast. Michael fired again, making sure she'd never identify him. Adam and Jeremy were lured into the forest under the lie that someone had been hurt in a hunting accident. Their reward for trying to help: bullets to the back of the head. Michael was caught days later driving Sandra's stolen Camaro after a high-speed chase. He had Adam's wallet in his pocket. He gave police Adam's name when they arrested him. The forensic evidence was everywhere: his DNA, his fingerprints, the murder weapon in his possession. Prosecutors said the case was airtight. The jury took less than a day to convict him. Texas scheduled his execution, and after nearly a decade of appeals, the date finally came. But here's what should make you pause, even if it makes you furious. Michael claimed police tortured that confession out of him. He said they choked him until he couldn't breathe, pistol whipped him in the head, and threatened to kill him if he didn't admit to pulling the trigger. He said Jason Burkett fired every shot, that he was just the thief who stole the car afterward. And here's the part that will split you down the middle. Jason Burkett, the man Michael said was the actual shooter, is still alive, serving life in prison, eligible for parole, while Michael died on a gurney with poison in his veins. So how does that work? How do 2 men commit the same crime, and one gets to keep breathing while the other gets executed? Was it because Michael had a prior record and Jason didn't? Was it because Michael's lawyer was overworked and underpaid while Jason's family scraped together money for better representation? Or was it because the system needed someone to die for this, and Michael, the adopted kid with ADHD and a rap sheet full of drug charges, was easier to kill than the other guy? And here's the controversy bomb that will make half of you rage and the other half question everything. Michael James Perry was given up for adoption at birth by a teenage mother struggling with addiction. His adoptive parents loved him, spent tens of thousands of dollars on therapy, sent him to specialized programs in Nebraska and Mexico, tried everything to save him. By age 8, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. By 13, doctors added oppositional defiant disorder and conduct disorder to his file. He ran away from home repeatedly. He stole from his parents. He threatened violence against other children. And the system documented all of it. Every diagnosis, every failed intervention. every red flag, and then did nothing that actually worked. By 19, Michael was homeless in San Diego. So desperate he became what he called a rent boy, selling his body to survive. He was addicted to pills, stealing prescription drugs, spiraling into a darkness no one pulled him out of. And then, just months later, 3 people were dead, and the state that had watched him fall for 19 years suddenly knew exactly what to do: kill him. So here's the question that should haunt you. If you adopt a baby, watch him struggle with diagnosed mental disorders from age 8, send him to every program that exists, and nothing works, whose fault is that? And when that child grows into a violent addict who commits murder, is executing him justice? Or is it just the state cleaning up the mess it helped create? Michael Perry's final words were soft, almost peaceful. "I know I will see my father again. He is waiting for me. I love you, Mom. I forgive you for this. I really do." No rage, no cursing, no courtroom meltdown, just forgiveness for the people about to kill him. Does that sound like a remorseless monster? Or does it sound like a broken man who never had a chance? Was Michael James Perry a cold-blooded killer who deserved to die? Or was he executed on a coerced confession while his co-defendant, who may have been the actual shooter, sits in prison watching TV? And if childhood trauma and mental illness don't excuse murder, and they don't, should they at least matter when deciding who lives and who gets the needle? Because this isn't just about one dead kid and 3 victims. This is about a system that watches children break, does nothing to fix them, and then kills them when they shatter completely. Is that justice? Or is that just revenge dressed up in a suit and tie, sold to us as closure? Michael James Perry did not begin life as a headline or a prison number. He began as a baby handed over by a teenage mother drowning in addiction, a woman who loved him enough, or was desperate enough, to give him away. He was adopted into a comfortable Texas home by parents who wanted to save a child. They had money, stability, and good intentions. On paper, he was one of the lucky ones, rescued from chaos, given a second chance before he could even walk. But some storms start inside the mind, long before the world knows what's brewing. By first grade, the cracks were obvious. Michael couldn't sit still. He couldn't focus. He couldn't follow simple instructions. Teachers flagged him. Doctors were called. He was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder at 8 years old. His parents tried everything: counseling, child psychologists, behavior programs. Nothing stuck. He started running away from home for days at a time, returning as if nothing had happened. Jewelry went missing. The family van disappeared and later turned up crashed after he took it for a joyride. When neighbors came home to find wallpaper torn down and wood carved up with a knife, it wasn't a mystery who had broken in. This wasn't normal misbehavior. This was a child unraveling in slow motion, while adults took notes and filed reports. By 7th grade, the diagnoses multiplied: oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, terms that sound clinical but mean something simple. This kid is angry, defiant, and dangerously unconcerned with other people's rights. Psychologists said he didn't qualify for special education. His IQ was normal. He wasn't stupid. He just wouldn't or couldn't act right. That made him even more frightening. A boy who understood the rules and ignored them anyway. His adoptive parents reached a breaking point. They sent him to Father Flanagan's Boys Town in Nebraska, a place famous for saving troubled youth. For 3 months, he seemed okay. Then he told a staff member, almost casually, "I don't know why you work here. People like me are going to rape or kill your kids." No rage, no shouting, just a flat, chilling statement. He was moved to a locked unit, 4 months in isolation, evaluated, observed, labeled, and then he was sent away, too disturbed for their programs, not mentally ill enough for others. He fell into the crack between sick and evil, and the system shrugged. His parents found another place, Casa by the Sea in Mexico, a tough-love residential facility for American teens their own country didn't know what to do with. Strict discipline, harsh rules. He finished high school there. On paper, it looked like progress. But on his 18th birthday, when the law could no longer force him to stay, he walked out. No ID, no job skills, no real plan. He landed in San Diego, homeless, hungry, and out of options. That's when the line finally snapped. An older man offered him shelter, food, a bed. The price was his body. Michael later called himself a rent boy, saying if the choice was starving or selling himself, he would sell himself. Once he crossed that line, others got easier. Pills to numb the shame, alcohol to blur the edges, theft to feed the addiction, stealing prescription drugs, shoplifting, low-level crimes that still landed him in handcuffs. Each arrest was another red flag. Each short sentence was another missed chance to intervene. By early 2001, his crimes were escalating. In May, he fired shots at a house. Deadly conduct, not just property crime. In October, he was caught trying to get 100 Xanax pills with a fake prescription. He knew how to manipulate systems now, pharmacies, doctors, anyone he could hustle. He was no longer just a troubled kid. He was a dangerous young man whose life was a fuse, burning fast towards something catastrophic. And through all of this, one thing stayed the same. The state watched. Schools documented his behavior. Psychologists diagnosed his disorders. Programs expelled him when he didn't fit. Juvenile systems held him, released him, and moved on. Police arrested him, processed him, and put him back on the street. Everyone saw the storm forming. No one stopped it. Years later, that same state would strap him to a gurney, inject his veins with chemicals, and call it justice. So here's the question you have to face. Even if it makes you sick, if you take a boy broken by disorders no one could control, cycle him through systems that only harden him, ignore every flashing red warning that he's becoming something dangerous, and then execute him when he finally explodes, are you protecting society or destroying your own evidence? If you build a monster and then kill it, are you making the world safer or just silencing the proof that you failed? October 24th, 2001. A Wednesday evening in Montgomery County, Texas. Sandra Stotler, 50 years old, came home from her shift as a nurse at Conroe Regional Medical Center. She lived in a gated community near Lake Conroe, the kind of neighborhood where people paid extra for security gates and felt safe leaving their garage doors open. Sandra was known at the hospital for her compassion, the kind of nurse who remembered patients' names and held their hands during bad news. At home, she was raising her teenage grandson Adam, whom she had adopted as a baby and loved as her own son. To him, she wasn't a grandmother. She was Mom. That evening, 2 young men knocked on her door. Michael Perry and Jason Burkett. They asked to see Adam, said they were friends. Sandra, trusting and polite, told them he wouldn't be home until around 9 and suggested they come back later. She had no reason to fear them, no reason to lock the door or call anyone. She was just being kind to a couple of kids who seemed harmless. But they came back. This time, they weren't asking. Jason knocked again, requesting to use the phone. Sandra let him in. Michael circled around to the back, slipping into the garage through an unlocked door. He carried a 12-gauge shotgun, the kind of weapon that doesn't leave room for survival at close range. When Sandra turned toward a noise in the laundry room, Michael stepped out and raised the barrel. She saw it. She knew. And then he fired. The blast struck her in the side, near her back. The force knocked her to the floor. Blood spread across the concrete, pooling beneath her as she tried to push herself up. She was still alive, still breathing, still trying to survive. Michael could have run, could have fled, and left her there to call 911, to survive, to identify him later. But he didn't. He fired again. This time, there was no getting up. Sandra Stotler died in her own garage, surrounded by the tools and boxes of a life she had worked hard to build, killed for a car she didn't even know they wanted. Michael and Jason wrapped her body in blankets from her bedroom, carried her to a borrowed truck, and drove her to Crater Lake. They dumped her in the water like garbage, covering her with sticks and brush, then left to finish what they started. But they still didn't have the keys to the red Camaro they wanted. So they went back to Sandra's house and waited. Adam Stotler, 17, and his best friend Jeremy Richardson, 18, had no idea what was waiting for them. When Michael and Jason flagged them down at the security gates, they told a lie designed to prey on decency. A friend had been hurt in a hunting accident and needed help. Adam and Jeremy, good kids who believed in helping people, followed them into the woods without hesitation. That kindness cost them everything. Jason shot Jeremy first. One blast from the shotgun. Execution style. Jeremy dropped, his body hitting the dirt before he could process what was happening. Adam tried to run. He made it a few steps before Jason fired again, then a third time, ensuring there was no chance of survival. Two teenagers, gunned down in the woods for no reason other than they had access to a car two addicts wanted to steal. Michael searched Adam's pockets, pulled out his wallet and keys, and the two of them walked away as if they had just completed an errand. Sandra's colleagues at the hospital noticed her absence immediately. She never missed shifts, never failed to call. When she didn't show up and didn't answer her phone, her supervisor requested a welfare check. Deputies arrived at her house on October 25th to find the garage door open, blood on the floor, and no sign of Sandra or Adam. Both vehicles were gone. The Camaro, the Isuzu Rodeo. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't a missing persons case. This was murder. 2 days later, fishermen at Crater Lake pulled up something tangled in their line. Blankets, and inside, Sandra's body. She had been underwater for days, her remains wrapped in the same bedding she had once used to sleep peacefully. The medical examiner confirmed what investigators feared: shotgun wounds, close range, no chance of survival. Somewhere out there, two killers were driving her car. On October 26th, Michael Perry was pulled over for traffic violations while driving Sandra's red Camaro. He led police on a high-speed chase, crashed the car, and fled on foot. When officers finally caught him, he had Adam Stotler's wallet in his pocket. But instead of giving his real name, he lied. He told them he was Adam Stotler. He was booked under a dead teenager's name, posted bond, and vanished. Days later, on October 30th, police spotted the stolen rodeo at a truck stop. Michael and Jason were inside. When officers approached, they tried to run, striking a deputy with the vehicle before crashing into a store. They were arrested, bloodied, and cornered. The murder weapon, the shotgun used to kill all three victims, was found in the vehicle. Michael confessed, but later he said that confession was beaten out of him. He claimed police choked him, pistol-whipped him, and terrorized him into admitting he pulled the trigger. He said Jason Burkett fired every shot, that he only stole the car afterward. Jason told a different story. blaming Michael for everything. The jury heard both versions and believed the prosecution's narrative. Michael was the shooter. Jason was an accomplice. Michael got death. Jason got life. But here's where it gets murky, where certainty crumbles and doubt creeps in. No forensic evidence definitively placed Michael's finger on that trigger. No eyewitness saw him fire. The confession he later recanted was the centerpiece of the case. And Jason Burkett, the man Michael said was the real killer, is alive today, sitting in a Texas prison with the possibility of parole. So the question you have to sit with is this: did the jury see the truth or just the story that hurt the least to believe? Because when 3 innocent people are dead and someone has to pay, it's easier to convict the guy with the confession and the criminal record than to admit you might not know for sure who pulled the trigger. And if you execute someone based on a confession they say was coerced, are you delivering justice or just closing the case? After his arrest, Michael Perry sat in Montgomery County Jail awaiting trial. But nothing about his time behind bars suggested remorse or reflection. If anything, he seemed to spiral further into chaos. While locked up, he racked up disciplinary violations, fights with other inmates, verbal confrontations with guards, destruction of property. He wasn't just waiting for his day in court. He was proving to everyone watching that he was exactly as dangerous as prosecutors would claim. The trial began with all the drama of a scripted performance. Prosecutors presented their case with surgical precision, laying out a timeline so clean it felt rehearsed. Sandra Stotler, beloved nurse and devoted mother, gunned down in her own garage. Adam Stotler and Jeremy Richardson, 2 innocent teenagers lured into the woods and executed for a car. Michael Perry, caught days later driving the stolen Camaro with a dead boy's wallet in his pocket. The murder weapon recovered from the vehicle he was driving. His confession, detailed and damning, admitting he fired the shots that killed all 3 victims. The defense fought back with the only weapons they had: Michael's broken childhood, his documented mental disorders, the system's repeated failures to help him. They brought in psychologists who testified about his ADHD, his oppositional defiant disorder, his conduct disorder diagnosed as early as age 7. They talked about the adoption, the early signs of trouble, the expensive treatment programs that all failed. They painted a picture of a boy who had been failed by every institution meant to protect him, a young man whose brain chemistry and environment had conspired to create someone incapable of normal moral reasoning. But the prosecution had Sandra's body pulled from a lake. They had Adam and Jeremy shot multiple times and left in the dirt like animals. They had grieving families sitting in the courtroom, tears streaming down their faces, demanding someone pay for the lives that had been stolen. And when those families took the stand, describing the holes left by Sandra's kindness, Adam's potential, Jeremy's friendship, the defense's talk of mental illness and system failures felt like excuses. The jury saw 3 corpses and 1 living defendant. The math was simple. Michael's confession became the centerpiece of the trial, the moment when his own words sealed his fate. He had told investigators he fired the shotgun that killed Sandra. He admitted to being present when Adam and Jeremy were executed. His details matched the crime scene. But during the trial, Michael changed his story. He said the confession was coerced, that police had choked him, pistol-whipped him, and threatened to kill him if he didn't admit to pulling the trigger. He claimed Jason Burkett was the real shooter, that he had only stolen the car after the murders were already done. Jason Burkett told a different story entirely, blaming Michael for everything. 2 men, same crime scene, completely opposite versions of what happened. The jury had to decide who was lying. They chose to believe the confession, the forensic evidence, and the prosecution's clean narrative. Michael Perry was the killer. Jason Burkett was the accomplice. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Capital murder. The courtroom erupted in reactions split down the middle. Sandra's family wept with relief. Jeremy's mother collapsed into her husband's arms. Adam's relatives held each other, finally hearing the words they had waited years to hear. On the other side of the room, Michael's adoptive mother sat frozen, her face blank, as if her mind had shut down to protect itself from processing what had just happened. Michael showed no emotion, no tears, no outburst, just a cold, distant stare, as if he had already accepted this outcome long before the jury foreman spoke. He didn't curse the judge. He didn't scream or flip tables. He just sat there, a young man watching his life end in real time. Then came the sentencing phase, where the state had to prove Michael deserved death rather than life in prison. This is where the rules get looser, where prosecutors can bring in evidence of bad behavior that was never charged as a separate crime. They highlighted every disciplinary violation from jail, every fight, every threat. They painted him as someone so violent, so incapable of rehabilitation, that letting him live, even in a cage, was too great a risk. The defense tried to counter with more testimony about his mental health, his traumatic childhood, the fact that he was still just a kid when these crimes happened. But it wasn't enough. The jury deliberated and returned with the sentence Texas had been waiting for: death. Jason Burkett, tried separately, received life in prison with the possibility of parole. Same crime, same victims, same evidence. One man sentenced to die, the other given a chance to breathe free air again someday. The disparity was glaring, and it raised a question that still haunts this case. Why? Was it because Michael confessed and Jason didn't? Was it because Michael had a longer criminal record? Was it because his lawyer was less effective? Or because the jury simply needed someone to execute and Michael fit the role better? Or was it because once a jury hears a confession, even a disputed one, they stop asking questions and start looking for the fastest route to closure? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Michael Perry was sentenced to death, based partly on behavior that never resulted in criminal charges. Jail fights, verbal threats, acts of defiance that were used to argue he was irredeemably dangerous, even though he was never tried or convicted for those acts. So the question becomes, should someone be sentenced to death for crimes a jury never actually convicted them of? Is that justice, or is that the system stacking the deck to make sure the outcome feels right, even if the process isn't? Because if we're going to kill people, shouldn't every single reason we use to justify that killing be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Or does beyond a reasonable doubt only apply to guilt, and once you're convicted, the state can throw anything at you to make sure you die? After the guilty verdict and death sentence, Michael Perry's case entered the appeals machine, a legal labyrinth that can stretch on for years or decades. His lawyers filed motion after motion, searching for any procedural error, any constitutional violation, any crack in the case that might save his life. They challenged the confession, arguing it was coerced through physical violence and psychological torture. They questioned the effectiveness of his trial counsel. They pointed to his documented mental disorders and argued that executing someone with his psychiatric history violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Every single appeal was denied. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed his case and found no reversible error. Federal courts examined the record and ruled that his constitutional rights had not been violated. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his claims. Year after year, the answer was the same: no relief. The system had spoken, and it had decided Michael Perry would die. By 2010, nearly a decade after the murders, his execution date was finally set, July the 1st. The countdown began, and with it came a wave of public attention that had been absent during most of his time on death row. Anti-death penalty activists mobilized, organizing protests, circulating petitions, and writing op-eds arguing that executing Michael would be a moral failure. Some focused on his age at the time of the crime, just 19, barely an adult. Others highlighted his mental health issues and the system's documented failures throughout his childhood. They argued that executing someone who had been so clearly failed by every institution meant to help him was not justice, but revenge. On the other side stood the families of the victims who had waited nearly 9 years for this moment. Sandra Stotler's colleagues from the hospital wrote letters supporting the execution, describing her kindness and the senseless brutality of her death. Jeremy Richardson's mother spoke publicly about the hole her son's murder had left in her family, a wound that would never heal. For them, Michael's execution wasn't revenge, it was accountability. It was the state finally delivering the justice it had promised when a jury sentenced him to death. Religious communities found themselves split, their internal contradictions laid bare by Michael's impending execution. Some Christian activists, invoking the teachings of Jesus, argued passionately for mercy. They pointed to Christ's command to love your enemies, to forgive 70 times 7, to turn the other cheek. They cited Jesus' own execution as an innocent man and his final words, forgiving those who killed him. How, they asked, could followers of that man support state-sanctioned killing? But other Christians, particularly in Texas, where evangelical faith runs deep and support for the death penalty remains strong, saw no conflict. They quoted Old Testament scripture, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed." They invoked Romans 13, which speaks of government authority as ordained by God to punish evildoers. For them, the death penalty wasn't murder. It was divine justice carried out through earthly authority. Sandra Stotler had been a person of faith. Her family attended church. Some members of their congregation openly supported the execution, seeing it as the rightful consequence of Michael's actions. This theological divide revealed an uncomfortable truth about American Christianity. It cannot agree on what mercy means when mercy costs something. It's easy to preach forgiveness in Sunday sermons when the sin is abstract. It's much harder when the sin is 3 bodies and a family destroyed. The same Bible that commands love for enemies also contains passages about justice and retribution, and which verses you emphasize often depends on whether you're standing with the victim's family or the condemned. Prominent death penalty opponents weighed in publicly. Documentary filmmaker Werner Herzog, who had interviewed Michael for his film Into the Abyss, spoke about the humanity he saw in the young man awaiting execution. He didn't excuse the crimes or minimize the victim's suffering, but he questioned whether killing Michael would accomplish anything beyond satisfying a primal desire for vengeance. Some religious leaders echoed this sentiment, arguing that a society that claims to value life should not be in the business of ending it, regardless of what the condemned had done. But the protests were smaller than they might have been for other death row inmates. Michael's case lacked the clear innocence claims that generate massive public outcry. He had confessed, even if he later recanted. He had been caught with the stolen car and the victim's possessions. The evidence, while not perfect, was strong enough that most people couldn't muster the outrage needed to fight for his life. He wasn't the sympathetic defendant activists dream of, the obvious wrongful conviction that makes ending the death penalty feel urgent. He was messy, complicated, guilty of at least some of what he was accused of, and that made him easy to let die. Michael's adoptive mother, Gail Perry, faced an impossible choice as the execution date approached. Her husband had just died. Now she had to decide whether to watch the state kill her son. She chose to be there, to sit behind the glass and bear witness, to make sure Michael didn't die alone. It was an act of love that transcended guilt or innocence, a mother refusing to abandon her child even as the system she lived under prepared to end his life. In the final days, Michael's lawyers filed a last-minute appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, knowing it was a long shot but unable to simply give up. The court denied the petition without comment. There would be no stay, no reprieve, no miraculous intervention. The state of Texas would proceed as planned. So here's the question that should split Christians right down the middle, the one that exposes the contradiction at the heart of faith-based support for capital punishment. Can you follow a man who forgave his executioners while they were literally killing him and still clap when the state straps someone down and pumps poison into their veins? Can you sing hymns about grace on Sunday and support executions on Monday? Can you preach that all lives are sacred and then argue that some lives deserve to be ended by the government? And if the answer is yes, if you believe those positions are compatible, then what does mercy even mean? Is it just something you extend to people who haven't done anything too terrible? Is it conditional, given only when the sin is small enough to forgive comfortably? Or is mercy supposed to be radical, uncomfortable, extended even, especially to those who least deserve it? Because the uncomfortable truth is this: if mercy only applies when it's easy, it's not mercy. It's just another word for approval. And if Christians can't extend mercy to the guilty, to the monstrous, to the ones everyone agrees deserve punishment, then maybe they don't actually believe in the grace they preach. Maybe they believe in a gospel with footnotes and exceptions, a God who forgives, but only up to a point. July 1st, 2010. Michael Perry's last meal was modest, almost childlike in its simplicity. 3 cheeseburgers, 3 root beers, a slice of apple pie. Not the elaborate feast some death row inmates request, no lobster, no gourmet steaks, no expensive indulgence meant to squeeze one final moment of pleasure from life. Just comfort food, the kind of meal a kid might ask for at a birthday party. The irony was brutal. A man who murdered 3 people for a car worth maybe $10,000 died without luxury, without extravagance, just ordinary food served on a plastic tray in a concrete room. His father had died 13 days earlier. His mother, Gail Perry, was still processing that loss when she made the decision to witness her son's execution. She would sit behind glass and watch the state end his life, the second unbearable funeral in less than 2 weeks. No parent should have to bury a child. No one should have to bury 2 family members before the earth has even settled on the first grave. By evening, guards came for Michael. They escorted him down the hallway toward the execution chamber, a small, sterile room that looked more like a medical suite than a place of death. His steps were steady, no struggling, no last-minute breakdown. Just a young man walking toward the inevitable with a kind of resigned calm that unsettled even the officers who had seen this before. Inside the chamber, he was strapped to a gurney, his arms extended outward like a crucifixion. IVs were inserted into his veins with practiced efficiency. Behind the glass partition, witnesses gathered in two separate viewing rooms. On one side sat the families of Sandra Stotler, Adam Stotler, and Jeremy Richardson. Mothers, fathers, siblings, friends who had waited nearly 9 years for this moment. Their faces were tight with grief, anger, and something that might have been relief. On the other side sat Michael's mother, alone in her pain, watching her son prepare to die. The warden asked if Michael had any final words. He turned his head as far as the restraints allowed and spoke, his voice soft, but clear enough to carry through the speakers into both witness rooms. "I know I will see my father again. He is waiting for me. To my mother, I love you. And to those doing this, I forgive you for this. I really do. No rage, no cursing, no defiant proclamation of innocence. Just peace, faith, and forgiveness for the people about to kill him." Some in the room found it moving. Others found it manipulative. A final performance from a killer trying to rewrite his legacy in his last breaths. But whatever it was, those were the words he chose: love and forgiveness. At exactly 6:17 p.m., the lethal chemicals began flowing into his veins. First, sodium thiopental, a sedative meant to render him unconscious. Then pancuronium bromide, a paralytic that stopped his breathing. Finally, potassium chloride, which stopped his heart. The process was clinical, measured, efficient. Michael's chest rose and fell a few times, then slowed, then stopped. His eyes closed. His body went still. Within minutes, a doctor stepped forward, checked for a pulse, and pronounced him dead. The entire execution took less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes from the first injection to the final declaration of death. Sandra Stotler had tried to stand after the first shotgun blast, bleeding and desperate, before Michael fired again to finish her. Adam and Jeremy had been lured into the woods under the pretense of helping someone, then executed at close range. Their deaths weren't clean or quick. They were terrifying, painful, and filled with the knowledge that someone they had trusted was about to kill them. Michael's death was peaceful by comparison, almost gentle. The state's sanitized version of justice that looked nothing like the violence he had inflicted. When it was over, the witnesses filed out in silence. Sandra's family released a statement saying they felt closure, that justice had finally been served. Jeremy's mother said she could finally start to heal, knowing the man who killed her son would never harm anyone else. Michael's mother left without speaking to reporters, her face blank, her grief too enormous for words. But here's what you have to sit with, and there's no comfortable way around it. Was this justice, or was this society killing the person it failed to save? Because Michael James Perry was failed long before he became a killer. Failed by a system that diagnosed his disorders at age 8 and then watched him spiral for 11 years without ever finding a treatment that worked. Failed by programs that expelled him instead of fixing him. Failed by a society that let a mentally ill teenager become homeless and desperate enough to sell his body just to survive. And then, when he committed the horror everyone should have seen coming, that same system strapped him down and killed him with surgical precision. If forgiveness is real, if Michael's final words meant anything, if the Christian witnesses in that room believed in the grace they sing about on Sundays, then why does the killing still go ahead? Why does mercy stop at the chamber door? Why is it easier to execute someone than to admit we built the monster we're afraid of? And here's the hardest question of all. If Jason Burkett, the man Michael said was the real shooter, is alive in prison with the possibility of parole, was Michael Perry executed for what he did, or for what the system needed him to be. Because someone had to die for Sandra, Adam, and Jeremy. Someone had to be the face of evil that made sense of senseless violence. And Michael, with his confession and his criminal record and his history of failure, fit that role better than anyone else. So, was his death justice? Or was it just the easiest answer to an impossible question? Dressed up in legal language and delivered with medical efficiency so we could all sleep better at night? Drop your answer in the comments, because this case will split you right down the middle. Some of you will say he got exactly what he deserved. Others will say the system killed the person it created. Either way, you're going to have to sit with that choice. And if you want more cases where the truth is uglier than the verdict, where the questions don't have easy answers, hit subscribe. We're going exactly where the comfortable stories refuse to go.